For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. I'm at the ISS in Pretoria to speak to Dr. Johan Burger about the implications of lawlessness in South Africa. Over the last few years, South Africa has increasingly found itself in the grip of widespread lawlessness that manifests itself in many ways. Please elaborate on this statement.
Yeah, I think we see this all the time, increasing levels of lawlessness, and often people think that lawlessness is just about crime. People committing all kinds of crimes, and I mean these happen, but what you see also in addition to that is general lawlessness, when people simply ignore to abide by the laws of this country. And we see this especially, but not only limited to them, taxi drivers, who has largely a complete disregard of the rules of the road. And to the extent that we've seen the examples in Durban and even here in especially Joburg last year, where they tend to think that they are above these laws, and their argument is normally that they're a business and they cannot afford to abide by these laws and these rules. So I mean, it becomes ridiculous if that is allowed to continue, and it does look like government finds it very difficult to act against them, because they threaten with strikes and blockades and all kinds of things. So government tends to rather leave them, and play it down a little. In Durban, we saw that they even insisted that, especially over peak hour periods, there should be no law enforcement. I mean, how ridiculous can this get? But we see it also in many other ways. I mean, corruption is another way in which lawlessness manifests, and it's increasing. And then you find these examples of vigilante activity, where people, just take to the streets and take the law in their own hands, and very often people who commits less serious offences, such as theft, burglary, serious enough, but not something that warrants the death sentence. But this is what then happens to them. They have no proper hearing, there's no court case, there's no trial or fair trial, and then summarily executed. And it continues. And there are many other examples. And the sad thing about all of this is very often ordinary citizens, when they see people doing these things, they follow that example because they see them get away with it. They see that they are able to get away or by on the yellow lane, the emergency lane of the road. And when they see people doing that, they then follow. And in the end, everybody does the same thing. So a general sense of lawlessness is becoming endemic in this country.
You state that lawlessness is not just about a general disregard for the law and the absence of a law enforcement, but also about the failures or absence of government. How is this applicable in South Africa?
Well, this is the interesting thing about lawlessness, it's a double-sided thing. It stands on two legs. So a lack of law enforcement, or improper law enforcement, or insufficient law enforcement, but it also is the other side, and that is the presence of government in terms of not just only allowing for and making certain that the laws are maintained and enforced, but also that its presence is made visible, and its presence should be made visible in a number of ways, but service delivery is one of them. And we see a complete breakdown in service delivery. And it goes even beyond that, where government officials and politicians in particular, especially in the run-up to elections, makes all kinds of popular promises which they cannot keep, and they know when they make those promises they will not be able to keep those promises. And people are sensing this, they are becoming aware of this, and they react to this. And And then there's another a problem with government presence, in the sense that where there's essential services needed or required, the ordinary citizen has no other way to get the attention of government to their needs. Because if they try through all kinds of legal ways to draw attention to their problems and their needs, their plight, then there's no attention, or very seldom any attention to this. So they now take to the streets, they burn tires, and they break things, and they commit all kinds of crimes, and even sometimes become very, very violent in the process. And that's how they draw government attention. You know, so everything about this is wrong. And then when government reacts to this, they only react, remember, not to the ordinary law-abiding calls, but they react to these extremes by communities. And then when they react, they often react with retaliatory violence. The police coming in with big armored vehicles, shooting tear gas, rubber bullets, and often people get injured, get killed. We saw this in Vicksburg last year, and we saw the consequences. So everything about this is wrong. And this is why I'm saying that lawlessness is not just about an absence of law enforcement, it's also about an absence of government in all the other spheres of our society.
You write that some commentators believe that the radicalization of service delivery protests is a reaction to the absence of a meaningful response from government, and that these protests should be seen now as municipal revolts and rebellion by the poor. Why do you say this, and what are the potential consequences for the country?
Well, this is what it is all about. Society broadly, and communities in particular, are now revolting. It's no longer only service delivery protests. The protests is now in many ways becoming revolts, mini revolts if you want, and the consequences of this over time may be that if you take these mini revolts and you escalate this, then you might have a larger revolt. This can become so serious that it can, if it's not contained, and we've seen this in North Africa, it can become that serious. And I think, you know, the warning signs are there. We should heed those warning signals and not wait until the situation escalates to the level that we saw in North Africa. And I'm not trying to be over dramatic in this. You know, I think in some of these other countries they waited too long and they suffered the consequences. I think we still have time, but we don't have much time. We need to react now. And therefore I'm saying, you know, the situation is far, far more serious than only public protests or service delivery protests.
Besides the threats of these protests, there are a number of consequences affecting the police. Can you elaborate on these challenges and what this means for the police force?
The poor police, I think they have so many problems of their own. I mean, we've seen the leadership problems that they are experiencing. There's some stability at the moment. We'll still have to see to what extent this is going to last, but we are hopeful. But if you look at the policemen and women at grassroots level, they are now throwing into the mess that is created by an absence of government. And wherever there are these very often legitimate service delivery protests, the police are sent in to manage the situation. I mean, these are just beautiful terms to describe a very, very difficult situation for the police service. Manage the situation. They cannot solve the situation. The problems that the people are protesting about are infrastructural problems. It's poverty problems. It's unemployment. It's a lack of services. Nothing of these are things that the police can do anything about. So the police are now sent in. They must go and solve the problem, because this is what managing means, in the hope that the police, by going in, they'll be able to stabilize the situation, arrest a few of the culprits, those that they see as instigating the problem. It's not solving the problem. They take out a few of those individuals, arrest them, and then charge them. Often they are not even charged. After a while, they're released and sent back. So nothing has been resolved. But what happened now for the police is they become the visible presence of government in a very antagonistic, very violent way often. So this becomes the visible presence of the police. So because there's no other government presence, those angry residents take it out on what they see as government presence. The police now represent government, and government lies at the heart of the problem. So they take it out on the police. So it becomes a very confrontational relationship between the police and communities. It has negative implications for the legitimacy of the police. It has negative implications for community-police relations, something that the police have been working on so hard since 1994-95 to change, so that they can have a much closer and a much easier relationship with communities, because they realize that they need the cooperation of communities if they want to perform their duties more effectively and efficiently. So all of this is being destroyed in the process. People's attitudes towards the police are hardening in the process. And so a complete destruction of police-community relations. So I think it's unfair to use the police in this way. Rather have a plan at fixing those things that communities are complaining about.
That was Dr. Johan Burger of the ISS speaking about lawlessness in South Africa.